When you walk into a modern zoo, safe behind reinforced glass, it's easy to buy into the curated narrative that humans are the masters of the biological domain. But if you strip away the blink of an eye that is civilization, that feeling of dominance dissolves to reveal a starker reality. For most of our existence, we weren't hunters at all. We were soft, screaming meat in a world engineered to kill us. Today, we are going to look at the stories that didn't make it into the history books, mostly because the protagonists were digested before they could tell anyone. These are the untold, savage animal deaths that reveal how easily nature can take the throne back. Let's start with a nightmare that plagues almost every parent. In 1924, in South Africa, researchers found a skull that would change anthropology forever. It was small, fragile, and belonged to an Australopithecus africanus, a toddler, aged about 3 or 4, living roughly 2.8 million years ago. We call him the Taung Child. For decades, scientists looked at the damage to the skull and assumed the child had been killed by a leopard or a saber-toothed cat. Mostly, big cats are the classic villains of the Pleistocene. It makes sense, right? But recently, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger took a closer look at the damage, specifically at the jagged, puncture-like marks inside the eye sockets. Cats don't kill like that. A leopard crushes the throat or bites the back of the skull. But there is a predator we've found out that kills by driving its talons into the eyes and brain of its prey to instantly incapacitate them, the crowned eagle. But here's where it gets truly horrific. The Taung Child wasn't just killed on the ground. The physics of the attack suggest he was lifted, so imagine the scene. A toddler, perhaps playing just a few feet away from the safety of the group. A shadow falls over him, not from a tree, but from the sky. A prehistoric raptor, likely significantly larger than modern eagles, drops with the force of a falling anvil. The talons, sharp as scalpels, pierce the orbital floor, the thin bone behind the eyes. The child likely died instantly. What followed, however, was anything but gentle. The eagle would have carried the 20 to 25-pound child to a nest high on a cliff edge. We know this because the skull was found among eggshells and the bones of hyraxes and baboons, a literal garbage chute of an eagle's nest. For millions of years, our ancestors had to look up with the same fear that a mouse feels today. The sky wasn't a source of wonder, it was a noose hanging overhead. If being snatched from above is bad, let's talk about being crunched from below. For a long time, archaeologists looked at the Peking Man site in Zhoukoudian, China, and told a heroic story. They found broken human skulls and burnt bones, and they painted a picture of Homo erectus as a brave hunter who mastered fire and cooked animals in a cave. It was a noble image of our ancestors. But modern taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and fossilize, ruined the party. Upon closer inspection, the tool marks on the bones weren't from stone knives, they were from teeth, and the hearths weren't necessarily cooking fires made by humans. They were likely natural fires, or guano combustion. The cave wasn't a human home, it was a dining hall, but the humans weren't the diners. The culprit was Pachycrocuta brevirostris, the giant, short-faced hyena. Now erase the image of the modern spotted hyena from your mind. Pachycrocuta was a tank. It weighed nearly 110 kilograms, about 240 pounds, the size of a lioness, but packed into a lower, denser frame built purely for force. Its skull was thick, its neck massive, and its jaws were capable of delivering bite forces exceeding 9,000 newtons. That's enough pressure to crack through an elephant's femur, one of the strongest bones in the animal kingdom. The evidence suggests that Homo erectus individuals weren't just killed, they were dismantled. The hyenas likely hunted them in packs or scavenged them, dragging the bodies back to the den. The broken skulls found at the site had their faces chewed off to access the brain, a high-fat delicacy. The limb bones were cracked open like walnuts to get to the marrow. This rewrites the story of the Peking Man completely. It transforms the story of man the hunter into man the scavenger who got caught. It implies that for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were competing for the same niche as these bone-crushing nightmares. And frequently, we lost. The sheer terror of hearing the giggle of a pack of lion-sized hyenas in the dark is something that is likely hardwired into our amygdala for a reason. Now let's move to the island of Flores in Indonesia. This island is famous for Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, a species of tiny humans standing only about 3.5 feet, 1 meter tall. Their small stature was an evolutionary adaptation to island life. a phenomenon called insular dwarfism. But while the humans got smaller, some of the animals got much, much bigger. Island gigantism created a true nightmare for these little people. While they had to worry about Komodo dragons, there was something arguably more disturbing: Leptoptilus robustus. This was a giant marabou stork. Modern marabou storks are already creepy. They are bald-headed, grim-looking scavengers that stand about 5 feet tall. But Leptoptilus robustus stood nearly 6 feet, 1.8 meters, tall and weighed heavily. This bird was literally twice the height of the adult humans it lived alongside. We have found the bones of these giant storks alongside the bones of the hobbits in the Liangbua cave. While we don't have a direct smoking gun skull with a beak mark yet, the ecological implications are terrifying. Storks are opportunistic predators. They eat anything they can fit down their throat. Imagine a 3-foot-tall human adult, armed with a tiny sharpened stick, staring up at a carnivorous bird that towers over him. This isn't a fight, it's a harvest. The stork wouldn't need to chew. It would simply stab down with a beak the size of a spear, incapacitate the little human, and swallow them whole. It is a death that feels prehistoric, almost dinosaur-like. To be eaten by a mammal is one thing, we are related. But to be eaten by a bird? That is a special kind of indignity. If we travel south to Australia, the horror doesn't just continue, it scales up dramatically. When the first Aboriginal people arrived on the continent somewhere between 50,000 and 65,000 years ago, they didn't step into the Australia we recognise today. They entered a land still ruled by megafauna, a land of monsters, and among the most terrifying of them all was Varanus priscus, better known as Megalania. Megalania wasn't just a big lizard, it was the largest terrestrial lizard to ever exist. Estimates vary, but conservative reconstructions suggest lengths of up to 7 meters, around 23 feet, and a weight exceeding 1,000 pounds. Think of a Komodo dragon, then triple its size, thicken its skull, lengthen its jaws, and give it the presence and confidence of a tank that knows nothing on land can challenge it. We know that early humans and Megalania coexisted. A death at the jaws of Megalania would have been among the most excruciating ways to die in human history. Like modern monitor lizards, Megalania likely possessed serrated, recurved teeth, perfect for slicing rather than crushing. These teeth weren't designed for a clean kill. They were designed to open flesh, tear muscle, and cause catastrophic blood loss with a single bite. So picture the scenario. An early human hunter moves through tall scrub, scanning for prey, unaware that he is already being watched. The ambush is sudden. Megalania charges with explosive speed because despite their size, monitor lizards are terrifyingly fast over short distances. There's no warning, just impact. Jaws clamp down on a leg, teeth slice through muscle and arteries. Venom floods the wound, but the bite alone wasn't the worst part. Modern research into Komodo dragons has confirmed what was once controversial. They possess venom glands. Their bite delivers toxins that prevent blood clotting, drop blood pressure, and induce shock. And then the lizard releases. It doesn't need to finish the job immediately. It knows you aren't going far. The victim staggers away, bleeding uncontrollably. Blood pressure begins to collapse as the venom does its work. Vision blurs. Weakness creeps in. The world feels cold, distant, unreal. Shock takes hold. Every step becomes harder than the last. The horror isn't just the pain or the injury, it's the realization. The knowledge that you are being tracked by a cold-blooded giant that doesn't need to hurry, doesn't need to tire, and doesn't need to worry. It can wait, and it will. That understanding, the slow awareness that your death is already decided, is the kind of nightmare that lingers long after the monster itself is gone. Finally, let's talk about a horror that isn't extinct. While fossils help us reconstruct the distant past, sometimes the clearest evidence of what humanity survived is still alive and breathing today. In the 1970s and 1980s, anthropologists spent years studying the Agda Negrito people of the Philippines. The Agda lived as hunter-gatherers, deeply intertwined with the forests, rivers, and wildlife around them. Their daily lives placed them in constant proximity to predators most modern humans will never encounter outside of a zoo. During these studies, researchers asked a question that sounded almost absurdly simple. Have you ever been attacked by a python? The answers were staggering. An estimated 26% of distinct Agda men reported surviving an attempted predation by a reticulated python. This wasn't rumor, myth, or symbolic storytelling. These were first-hand accounts of people who had been seized, coiled, and nearly killed. We tend to think of snakes as ankle biters, small, venomous pests hiding in tall grass. But that illusion collapses when you confront the reality of the reticulated python. This animal is not a snake, in the way we casually imagine snakes. It is a living engine of muscle, a constrictor capable of growing 20 feet or longer, with a body thick enough to overpower deer, pigs, and, in rare circumstances, humans. For the actor, this was not a background fear. The python was a legitimate man-eater, sharing the same landscape. What makes this form of death especially disturbing is not just its brutality, but its mechanics. For decades, it was believed that constrictors killed by suffocation, by squeezing the chest until the victim could no longer inhale. But modern research has shown that this explanation is far too gentle and far too slow for what actually happens. A python doesn't wait for you to run out of air. Instead, it applies overwhelming pressure to the body, collapsing major blood vessels and compressing the heart itself. This causes ischemia, a catastrophic loss of blood flow. Circulation stops, blood cannot reach the brain. Cardiac arrest follows within seconds or minutes. The body shuts down, not because it can't breathe, but because the heart is physically prevented from doing its job. For the victim, however, those seconds stretch into something far longer. The attack is almost always an ambush. Often it happens at night. One moment, you are walking, resting, or sleeping on the forest floor. The next, a wall of muscle explodes from the darkness. Coils wrap around your torso, your limbs, your neck, and then they tighten. There is no dramatic struggle, no prolonged screaming. The terror is silent. You cannot cry out because the air is forced from your lungs. Your ribs bend. Your heartbeat stutters. Panic floods in as your body realizes what your mind barely has time to process. The last sensation is not pain in the traditional sense. It is pressure, immense, inescapable, hydraulic pressure, applied by a reptile that does not hate you, does not fear you, and does not recognize you as anything more than a calculation of calories, a warm, struggling mass of meat. The AGTA study forces an uncomfortable realization. For millions of years, humans sleeping in the wild weren't just afraid of the dark because they couldn't see what was there. They were afraid because something was there, silent, patient, and strong enough to hug them to death without making a sound. From the eagle snatching our young to the lizard rotting us alive, history proves we weren't conquerors. We were prey. We are the refugees of a biological war, alive only because our ancestors were paranoid enough to hear the twig snap. So the next time you rage at a deadline or traffic, take a moment to appreciate the luxury of your problems. You aren't scanning the tree line for a leopard, and you certainly aren't checking the ceiling for a python. You have achieved the ultimate evolutionary prize, a safety purchased with millions of years of blood, boredom. And considering the screaming alternatives we just discussed, boredom is a beautiful thing. Thanks for watching, and stay off the menu.